On Christmas Eve, in my daughter's living room, she looked at me with eyes I no longer recognized and said, "Sorry, Mom, we want to keep it just family this year." I stood there, holding the platter of cranberry tart I'd baked that morning, my hands suddenly feeling too heavy, too clumsy. The smell of pine and cinnamon twisted in my throat. My knees locked. My heart crawled up into my throat like a trapped animal. Just family. I looked around the room. The ornaments I had passed down from my own mother glinted under the lights of the Christmas tree. The stockings I had hand-stitched when my daughter was 8 hung neatly by the fireplace. I had believed I was part of the very fabric of this family, a thread woven into every tradition, every quiet morning, every silly song. But in that one sentence, she snipped me out like I was a frayed edge. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words dissolved before they reached my tongue. Instead, I gave a small nod, a pathetic little bob of my head that felt like signing my own eviction notice. I heard my voice, tinny and far away, say, "I understand." I didn't. The room was silent except for the hum of Christmas carols in the background, as if even the music knew better than to interrupt. My daughter's husband shuffled from foot to foot, avoiding my eyes. The children peeked at me from behind the couch, sensing something heavy and sharp had just fallen between us. I set the tart on the dining table. My fingers trembled, a tremor so fine it almost felt like a whisper against my skin. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to say, "I paid for this house when you were drowning in debt. I covered your first mortgage payment. I stayed up all night, sewing those stockings. You called me your best friend when you were little." But I just stood there. The betrayal throbbed under my ribs, echoing like a bruise every time I took a breath. She leaned in and gave me a quick, careful hug, the kind you give a stranger who's crying on a bus. Then she turned back to her husband, smiling wide, already moving on. I stood in that living room for a few more seconds, the smell of roast turkey and baked apples swirling around me like a mocking dance. My mind started to pick at every moment, every word I had missed, every small shift in her voice over the years. When did I become a burden instead of a mother? When did my love turn into something they felt they had to manage, like a forgotten casserole in the fridge? I shuffled to the door, gripping my coat like a lifeline. As I stepped into the cold night air, the warmth of that house, my house once, my home once, stayed behind, curling into the corners where I was no longer welcome. Outside, the snow had started to fall in slow, deliberate flakes, as if even the sky was tired of rushing. I stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the muffled laughter inside, and felt something in me break. I never thought that Christmas Eve would be the day my daughter taught me that love without respect is just another form of loneliness. I forced a polite smile and replied, "I understand." But inside, my heart cracked into pieces so sharp I could almost feel them slice through my chest. I walked home in the dark, the cold air biting at my cheeks, but it felt easier to bear than the hollowness echoing inside me. Each step felt like dragging 1,000 unspoken words behind me. When I finally stepped into my kitchen, the warmth should have comforted me. The kettle still on the stove from the morning tea, the little reindeer mug my daughter had given me years ago. Everything was there, exactly as I left it, but nothing felt familiar anymore. I set my purse on the counter and stood there, frozen, the silence pressed against my ears, so heavy I thought I might drown in it. I turned on the radio, hoping for noise, for a voice that wasn't my own trembling thoughts. Old carols spilled into the room, cheerful and bright. Silent night. I sat at the kitchen table and wrapped my hands around the reindeer mug. I didn't pour anything in it. I just held it, like a fragile memory I was too afraid to let go of. When did I become an outsider in my own family? Was it last Christmas when she forgot to hang my stocking? Or 2 summers ago when she said I shouldn't travel with them because it might be too tiring for you, Mom? A million tiny moments replayed in my mind. The missed calls, the short visits, the polite but distant hugs, every sign I had brushed off, every cold edge I softened with excuses. I thought I was giving her space, that I was being a good mother, supportive, selfless. I didn't see I was being carefully folded out of the picture. I looked over at the small collection of holiday cards taped to the fridge. Most were from neighbors, a few from distant cousins. Nothing from my daughter this year. I hadn't even noticed until now. I pressed my forehead against the cool surface of the table. The loneliness roared inside me like a sudden storm. When did I become a stranger in my own story? I wanted to call someone. My sister. An old friend. Anyone. But the shame glued me to the chair. I imagined their pitying voices. "Oh, I'm so sorry, that must be so hard." And I knew I couldn't bear to hear it. So I sat there, listening to Silent Night drift through the radio. The words so gentle they felt like a cruel joke. I thought of the cranberry tart, probably already cut and eaten without me. My place at the table empty, my stories and laughter replaced by someone else's comfort. I closed my eyes and let the realization wash over me. I wasn't family anymore. I was convenient until I wasn't. Useful until they found new ornaments to hang, new stories to tell without me. And in that quiet kitchen, with my fingers wrapped around an empty mug, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't beg to belong again. The next morning, I pulled open the curtains and watched the pale winter sun crawl across my yard. The snow looked beautiful at first, smooth, untouched, but beneath it, I knew there was ice, hard and unforgiving. Just like the warmth I used to believe lived in my daughter's heart. I wrapped myself in my thickest cardigan and decided to walk to the corner store. I needed milk, but really I just needed to move, to feel my body doing something other than sitting, waiting for calls that wouldn't come. Mrs. Jennings, my neighbor, was sweeping her porch when I passed. She looked up and smiled. "All ready for New Year's?" she chirped. I opened my mouth to say something cheerful, but my voice stumbled. I just nodded. When I came home, there was a voicemail from Mrs. Miller across the street. She sounded bright and breathless. "Oh, I just wanted to thank you for letting your daughter host the big New Year's party at your house. So many guests, even her husband's cousins from out of state. What a wonderful gesture, dear." I felt the words claw at my throat. My house, the house I built with my late husband, the house I repainted every spring, where I knew every creak in the floorboards and every stubborn rosebush in the garden. Years ago, I had transferred partial rights to the house to my daughter and her husband. Just to make them feel secure, I told myself, to give them a future. I thought I was giving them a gift of love, of belonging. I didn't know I was signing myself into exile. I hung up the phone slowly and went to sit on the edge of my bed. My knees ached. My chest felt tight, as if the walls were pressing in on me. I imagined them there already, putting up their party banners, bringing in platters of food, laughter echoing down my hallway. Her husband's cousins I had never met, drinking from my wine glasses, leaving their coats on my antique chairs. I saw my daughter walking through the kitchen, probably boasting about her generous mother who had given them so much freedom. I wondered if she even mentioned me at all, or if I had already been reduced to a line in a story they told to justify their takeover. That house was supposed to be my safe place after my husband died, the place where I kept his garden gloves in the shed, his old radio by the kitchen window, the place where I whispered goodnight to his memory every evening. And now they had turned it into a stage for their social climbing. I pressed my hand to my heart, feeling the slow, heavy thud. The betrayal wasn't just that they excluded me from a party. It was the realization that my love, all those sacrifices, the quiet loans, the endless patience, had been twisted into an unspoken entitlement. They loved my gifts, not me. I closed my eyes and saw it clearly for the first time. I had given them everything without making them earn a single ounce of respect. I opened my eyes to the quiet room around me, the soft ticking of the old clock on the dresser, my wedding photo in its silver frame. I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Not rage exactly, but a quiet, steady resolve. They wanted my house. They wanted my life. But they forgot one thing. I was still here. And I was not as fragile as they believed. I sat at my old oak desk that afternoon, my fingers drumming on the surface. The house deed lay in front of me, its edges soft and worn from all the times I had touched it, reassured myself with it. I slipped on my reading glasses and read every line again, my eyes catching on the clause I had almost forgotten. Majority ownership remains with the grantor until full transfer conditions are met. Grantor. That was me. I stared at that line, my breath caught halfway in my chest. My daughter and her husband had partial rights. Yes, but I still held the majority. They couldn't sell it. They couldn't even rent it out legally without my approval. A warmth spread through my fingers, up my arms, into my chest. Like blood returning to a limb I thought I had lost, I pulled the deed closer and ran my hand over my name. My name, not theirs. I thought about the first day we moved into that house. My husband carried me over the threshold, laughing, almost dropping me because the door frame was narrower than he expected. We slept on the living room floor that night, nothing but a mattress and a radio playing soft jazz. I thought about every spring I had spent in that garden, every birthday cake I had baked in that kitchen. The house wasn't a gift to them, it was a living part of me. As I read further, the cold knot in my stomach started to loosen. I realized I still had power. I wasn't just some old woman they could shuffle aside with polite smiles and empty words. I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly. A laugh, a strange, rusty sound I barely recognized, slipped out of my mouth. I pressed my palm against my chest, feeling that warmth turn into something stronger, sharper. For so long I believed I had to be quiet, easy, agreeable. That love meant giving without limits. But maybe love also meant protecting myself, drawing a line in the sand. They had built their new lives on my sacrifices. But they had forgotten that I was still alive, still thinking, still capable of choosing. I closed the folder and stood up. My knees creaked, but I felt a lightness in my spine I hadn't felt in years. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea, and sat by the window. As I watched the late winter light spill across the floor, I felt a flicker of power run through me, like a silent anthem. I wasn't gone. I wasn't irrelevant. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the smallest spark of possibility, glowing quietly in my bones. The next morning, I brewed a pot of strong chamomile tea, the way my mother taught me when I was a girl. Strong enough to hold your backbone steady, she used to say. I carried the steaming pot to the kitchen table and dialed Margaret's number. Margaret, with her blunt gray bob and her lawyer's voice that could slice through butter. We met at church decades ago, long before my daughter ever learned to twist my love into currency. She picked up after 2 rings. Morning. What's this? A holiday call? Her voice was bright, but I could hear her sharpness underneath. I swallowed, my throat dry despite the tea. Margaret, I need to ask you something. About the house. There was a short pause. Tell me everything. I laid it all out. Every detail. The partial transfer. The way they planned parties in my house while locking me out of their lives. The text messages. The frozen smiles. The whispered humiliations I had swallowed for years. When I finished, Margaret was silent. I imagined her sitting in her kitchen, glasses sliding down her nose, her legal pad already half filled with scribbles. Finally, she exhaled sharply. They're playing a long game, honey, but they made one mistake. They underestimated you. I pressed the mug to my lips, but I didn't sip. My hands shook slightly, but I forced them to steady. You have every right to reclaim control, Margaret said. That house is still yours in the eyes of the law. You can assert those rights tomorrow if you wanted to. A small, almost childish voice inside me whispered. Really? But you need to be careful, she continued. This isn't about revenge. This is about dignity. About showing them you're not the invisible benefactor they think you are. I closed my eyes. The idea felt dangerous, thrilling, like standing at the edge of a frozen pond and daring to take that first step. We can draft a notice, formally asserting your majority ownership. You don't have to evict them yet. Just remind them who really holds the keys, Margaret said, her voice steady as a heartbeat. I opened my eyes to the weak winter light filtering through my curtains. It danced across my kitchen counter, glinting off the little sugar bowl one had kept since my wedding. For the first time in years, the idea of fighting didn't feel ugly or exhausting. It felt necessary, like coming up for air after being underwater too long. When can we start? I asked. My voice sounded different to me. Lower, firmer. I'll come over tomorrow morning. Bring tea. We'll do this together, Margaret said. I hung up and set the mug down. My hands were steady now. I looked around my kitchen. The faded floral curtains, the dent in the counter where my daughter once spilled hot caramel, the pantry door that always squeaked no matter how much I oiled it, all of it mine. And in that quiet room, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally remembering who I had always been, before their demands, before their endless hunger for more. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I stood at the window, watching the first gray light crawl across the snow. My breath fogged the glass, and I traced a small circle with my fingertip, as if I could peer into another life, one where my daughter still called me Mama with warmth, where she still asked for my advice instead of my assets. At precisely 9 o'clock, Margaret knocked. She stepped into my kitchen in her heavy wool coat, a stack of folders under her arm, and a fresh loaf of rye bread poking from her tote bag. I brought sustenance, she said, pushing past me. Her presence filled the room in a way that felt like an old quilt, heavy, comforting, stitched together by shared years. We sat across from each other at the table, steam rising from the chamomile tea. My hands rested flat on the wood, palms open. I told her everything again, this time slower, with each word heavy enough to bend the air. My voice cracked once or twice, but I didn't let it stop me. Margaret listened, her pen scratching quietly, her eyes sharp and bright behind her glasses. When I finally finished, she put her pen down. "You know what this is, don't you?" she said softly. "What?" "It's not about a house. It's about respect. About your daughter believing you don't deserve a seat at the table anymore. She wants your resources, but not your presence." I felt the words strike deep, like a spade turning soil. My fingers curled around the edge of my tea mug. Margaret reached across and covered my hand with hers. "I've watched you carry that family for decades. You paid the bills, you bailed them out, you stood quietly in the background so they could shine. But you were never meant to disappear." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I forced them back. "So," she continued, her voice turning brisk, "we'll draft a formal notice today. You'll assert your legal rights, reclaim your majority stake. We'll keep it firm but dignified. This isn't vengeance, it's a correction." I let the word echo. Correction. I nodded. The motion felt heavy but right, like closing a door that had swung open too long. Margaret started pulling out papers, her movements efficient and precise. I read every line, every clause. I asked questions, pointed at paragraphs. For the first time in years, I felt the sharpness in my mind return, like a knife I'd hidden in the back of a drawer. After an hour, Margaret leaned back and sipped her tea. "You'll serve this notice first. You're not evicting anyone yet, but you're making it clear. This is your home, and your word matters." I breathed in deeply. "And after that?" I asked. She smiled gently. "After that, you decide who stays in your life, and who doesn't. But it starts with this." I looked down at the papers spread across my table. The same table where my daughter once drew crooked Christmas trees, where I taught her to braid pie crusts. My heart hurt, but underneath that pain, there was something else rising. A deep, slow warmth. Dignity. I reached for the pen. My fingers didn't shake. I signed my name, each letter steady and deliberate. When I looked up, Margaret's eyes shone, and she squeezed my hand once more. "It's not revenge," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "It's a reminder that I'm still here, and I still matter." That night, after Margaret left, I stayed at the kitchen table long after the tea had gone cold. My fingers traced the edge of the signed notice again and again, like I was learning a new language, one written in courage instead of fear. Around midnight, I stood up. My knees ached, but they felt strong. I walked to the guest room, the one that used to be my sewing sanctuary. The fabric scraps still sat in a basket in the corner, and the sewing machine waited under its dust cover like an old friend. I sat down on the edge of the bed and picked up my phone. I scrolled past old photos, my daughter's first day of school, her wedding day, that blurry picture of her holding a margarita on some beach I had paid for. I didn't stop. I wouldn't let the ache pull me under tonight. Instead, I opened my contact list and found the number for a local property management firm. I had saved it years ago when I considered renting the house for extra income, back when I still thought we were a family who shared and supported each other. My thumb hovered over the call button. They won't expect this, I thought. They think I'm too soft to do anything without their permission. The phone rang twice before a young man answered. His voice was brisk, almost too professional. I introduced myself and explained what I needed. Details about short-term rental contracts, temporary tenants, and options for owners who wanted flexibility and control. As he spoke, I took notes. Every word felt like a small stone in the foundation I was laying under my own feet. When he paused, I swallowed hard and asked, "If my daughter has partial rights, but I'm the majority owner, can I still make these decisions?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied without hesitation. "As the majority owner, you have authority to rent or reclaim as you see fit, provided you serve proper notice." I felt my lips twitch into something almost like a smile. "Thank you," I said, my voice calm. When I hung up, I sat there in the half-dark, my heart pounding so loud it felt like it might echo off the walls. I imagined my daughter finding out, the frantic texts, the performative phone calls dripping with fake concern, the long paragraphs accusing me of destroying the family. In the quiet of that guest room, I rehearsed what I might say if she confronted me. "This is still my home, my life. You taught me how small I could become, and now I'm learning how large I can be again." A shiver ran down my spine, but it wasn't fear. It was the first taste of freedom, sharp and electrifying. I stood and looked around the room one last time. The faded quilt on the bed, the crooked frame of my husband's fishing photo on the wall. "I'm not doing this out of hate," I whispered to the empty room. "I'm doing this to remember who I am." Then I turned out the light, holding on to that quiet power like a flame cupped in my hands. The next morning, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd stay quiet for a few more days. But by noon, my phone buzzed with a long text from my daughter. It started with crying emojis, as if her tears could erase all the years she had taken my love for granted. "Mom, this is so hard for me to write," she began. "I just want peace in the family. You're overreacting. We only ever wanted what's best for everyone." I read each word slowly, my thumb hovering above the screen. My eyes traced the loops and dots of her typing. The same fingers that once painted sloppy Mother's Day cards, now typing out carefully crafted guilt. She painted herself as a martyr, a wounded daughter, struggling under the unbearable weight of a mother's irrational decisions. Every sentence felt like a little dagger turned inward, each one designed to twist and make me doubt myself. "I thought you wanted us to feel secure. I thought you trusted us. We were just trying to create a peaceful environment for the children." I almost laughed at that one, if it hadn't hurt so much. Then came the final blow. "Anyway, we're still gonna have the New Year's party as usual. You're welcome to come if you want, no hard feelings." As if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't exiled me from my own house. As if my pain was a minor inconvenience she could smooth over with an invitation that meant nothing. I read the message again, and again. Each time the sting dulled, replaced by something colder. For a brief second, I felt my resolve flicker. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I should just go to the party and act normal. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Then I pictured them laughing in my living room. Her in-laws sipping champagne on my old rug. My daughter boasting about their home while I sat in the corner like a ghost. No. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. My mother's voice echoed in my mind. "Quiet doesn't mean weak. You can love someone and still say no." I opened my eyes and stared at the text. I didn't reply. I set the phone down, folded my hands in my lap, and felt the silence rush in. But this time it wasn't an empty silence. It was deliberate. It was mine. They wanted me to fold, to slip back into my small, obedient role. But I wasn't that woman anymore. She wanted just family? I was about to show her what family really looked like when you stripped away the money and the manipulation. After I put my phone down, I felt the walls close in around me. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, as if the house itself was watching me, waiting to see if I would crumble. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside into the brittle winter air. The wind slapped my cheeks, sharp and unapologetic, and for the first time in days, I welcomed it. I walked to the neighborhood park, my boots crunching in the snow. The bare trees stretched their limbs against the pale sky, like old women reaching for something they'd lost. I wandered the path past the pond where I used to take my daughter to feed the ducks. I could still hear her giggles echoing in my mind, a sound that felt like it belonged to a different lifetime. I sat on a cold bench and watched the breath rise from my lips in small, stubborn clouds, my hands tucked into my coat pockets, searching for warmth that wouldn't come. As I watched a young couple struggle to push a stroller over the icy path, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about a party. This wasn't just about a house. It was about respect. It was about dignity. It was about love twisted into currency, turned into leverage, until I no longer recognized it as love at all. All those years, I believed being silent was the same as being kind, that if I made myself small enough, they would see my sacrifices and love me more. But kindness without boundaries isn't love. It's surrender. I thought of all the quiet humiliations I had absorbed, the skipped invitations, the hollow thank yous, the subtle reminders that my worth was measured in dollars and deeds, not in my laugh, not in my stories, not in the warmth of my hands. I pressed my palm to my chest, feeling the steady thump of my heart. Strong, patient, waiting for me to remember it was there. I closed my eyes and breathed in the frozen air. I felt it fill every corner of me, clearing the fog. When I finally stood up, my knees protested, but I ignored them. I had come here lost and raw. But I left the park with my spine straighter, my steps surer. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing. I was done begging to be included in a family that saw me as an accessory. If they couldn't see the woman in front of them, they wouldn't get to enjoy the fruits of her love anymore. I turned back toward home, my coat flaring behind me like a small flag of defiance. That night, I sat in my sewing room, my quiet refuge, the one place in this house that still felt completely mine. The walls were lined with fabric scraps in colors my daughter had once mocked as old lady colors, and the little jars of buttons sparkled like small, defiant stars. I sat at my old wooden desk, phone in hand, staring at the number of the property agent I had spoken to before. My thumb hovered over the screen for what felt like hours. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might shatter my ribs. But beneath that pounding, I felt a thin thread of power, tight and clear. Finally, I pressed call. The agent picked up quickly. His voice was smooth, professional, unaware that on the other end was a woman who was about to change everything. "Yes, ma'am, we still have an interested group for the New Year's rental," he said. "They're a group of college students attending a festival. Very respectful, good references." My fingers tightened around the phone. I glanced at the quilt draped over my sewing chair, the one I had stitched in the weeks after my husband died. Each square a silent prayer to keep myself busy instead of collapsing. "I'd like to move forward," I said. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. Steady, cold, final. "Understood. We'll send the rental contract for signature tonight. We can coordinate key exchange by December 30th. December 30th. The day before her grand party. The day she would expect to fill my halls with laughter and clinking glasses. I could almost hear my daughter's voice now. "What do you mean? There's a rental. You can't do this to me." But the truth was, I could. And I would. After we hung up, I stared at my reflection in the window. The woman who looked back at me had deep lines around her mouth, hair gone mostly silver. But her eyes, they were alive again, burning with something I hadn't felt in years. Resolve. I opened the drawer and pulled out my old notebook. I started scribbling plans, checklists, things to pack, what to say if they showed up screaming on my porch. Halfway down the list, I stopped and pressed my pen to my lips. I realized this was more than reclaiming a house. This was about reclaiming myself. The self I had slowly handed over in exchange for small scraps of love and approval. The self I thought I had to bury to be a good mother. I set the pen down and breathed deeply. The room felt different now. Not just a quiet corner, but a war room. Outside, the moon shone cold and unbothered, lighting up the frost on the bushes below. I sat there for hours, going over the plan, committing each step to memory until I felt it in my bones. By the time I finally stood up, my heart was still racing. But now, it beat in rhythm with something stronger than fear. It beat in rhythm with freedom. On the morning of December 30th, I woke before dawn. The house was still, wrapped in that eerie blue hush that only comes before sunrise. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the framed photograph on my nightstand. My daughter as a baby, chubby fists gripping my finger like I was her whole world. A memory stabbed through me. I almost let it stop me. Almost. But then I remembered the text, the polite betrayal, the party invitations to strangers in my house. I remembered the taste of that loneliness in my kitchen, sharp as broken glass. I stood up and got dressed carefully, like a soldier preparing for battle. Warm slacks, my thick sweater, my old wool scarf. Practical, quiet armor. In the kitchen, I made myself a strong cup of tea and carried it to my sewing room. My command center now. I took one last look at the finalized rental agreement on my desk. My name. My signature. My decision. I picked up my phone and called Margaret. She answered on the first ring, her voice already sharp and awake. "I'm ready," I said simply. "I'll file the formal notice and serve it immediately." "You don't have to see them today if you don't want to," she replied. "I want to do it," I said. My voice didn't tremble. Together, we finalized the message. Then, with a single deep breath, I pressed send. Notice to vacate within 24 hours, due to an authorized, temporary rental contract, effective immediately. Your personal belongings must be cleared by 10 a.m. December 31st. My thumb hovered for a moment, like a bird perched on a branch. Then I tapped send. The moment it left my phone, I felt my body go cold, like I'd jumped into a winter lake. But beneath the shock, something warm pulsed deep in my stomach. A small, fierce light. I stood by the window, staring at the front walk, waiting for the inevitable. The phone calls, the texts, the hurricane. But for a few long, silent minutes, nothing. The world outside kept moving. A neighbor jogged past with their dog, steam curling from their breath. A car rolled slowly down the icy street. Life continued, unaware that inside my house, a war had been declared. I pressed my hand to the glass. My fingers left small, foggy prints, proof that I was still here, that I still had a voice, that I hadn't disappeared into their narrative after all. I turned away from the window, breathing deeply, steadying my hands. The shock would come later. The tears might come later. But in that moment, I felt like a ghost stepping back into her own skin. My house, my rules, my story. It didn't take long. My phone exploded in a sudden, furious chorus. Calls, texts, notifications, so constant it sounded like rain on a tin roof. I stared at the screen, watching her name flash again and again. My daughter. The same daughter who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares, who once clung to my skirt when she was scared of thunder. The woman on the other end of that phone wasn't that little girl anymore. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th, I answered. The second I spoke, her voice erupted. "What did you do? You're ruining everything. How could you do this to us? To me? You're heartless." Her words were frantic, each syllable slicing into me like a blade. I held the phone to my ear, my knuckles white. I swallowed hard. Then, I took a deep breath and spoke. Slow, quiet, firm. "You told me you wanted to keep it just family. Well, this house is my family too." Silence. I could hear her breathing, ragged and uneven on the other end. I pictured her standing in our kitchen, her mouth open, her face red with rage and disbelief. She tried again. "You're throwing us out? Over a party? After everything we've done for you?" My lips curved into a small, sad, smile, after everything I had done for them. "You didn't invite me to the table, my own table," I said. "You turned my home into a stage for your own applause. You showed me exactly where I stand." Her voice dropped to a pitiful whimper. "Please, Mom, we can fix this. We just wanted—" I cut her off. "You wanted control. And now I want peace." There it was, my truth, finally spoken aloud. She started to sputter, her voice rising again. But I didn't wait. I ended the call. My hand shook as I set the phone down on the counter. I stood there, the room spinning gently around me. For a moment, I thought I might collapse under the weight of it all. The grief, the shock, the echo of her words bouncing off the walls. Then a strange stillness settled over me. My breath evened out, my shoulders dropped. I realized I didn't need her permission to reclaim my life. I didn't need to be invited back into my own story. I pressed my palm to the cool countertop, the same one where I taught her to roll pie dough, the same place I used to set out her lunchbox before school. Now it belonged to me again, fully, completely. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt something like freedom blooming quietly beneath my ribs. On New Year's Eve, I sat across the street in my old blue sedan. The engine was off, the cold seeping in through my boots, but I barely felt it. I watched the house, my house, through the windshield, my breath fogging the glass. At exactly 2 p.m., the rental van pulled up. One by one, a group of college students piled out, laughing, bundled in puffy jackets and carrying duffel bags and cases of sparkling cider. Their excitement was electric, a sweet kind of chaos. I watched them shuffle up the walkway, each step echoing like a drumbeat in my chest. One girl turned around to help a boy carry a speaker. Another young man set down a bag and marveled at the garden gnome by the steps, the one my husband had painted for me on our 25th anniversary. A few minutes later, I saw them unlock the door and step inside. Then, my daughter appeared on the lawn. Her face was pale, mouth hanging open, a half-decorated platter of hors d'oeuvre trembling in her hands. Her husband was next to her, his eyes darting wildly between the renters and the house, his phone glued to his ear in desperation. I watched as she set the platter down on the lawn, her fingers flexing like she didn't know what to do with them. One of the in-laws, her husband's cousin from out of state, I guessed, stood nearby holding a tray of cupcakes, staring like he'd just witnessed a car crash. For a few moments, the whole scene seemed frozen. A tableau of humiliation, of disbelief. Then the shouting started. I couldn't hear the words from inside my car, but I didn't need to. Her hands were waving wildly, her mouth opening and closing in frantic bursts. Her husband was pacing in circles, a man whose big plan had cracked right down the middle. The young renters moved carefully, polite but firm. They carried in their bags, one by one, as if they'd done this 100 times before. They ignored the commotion on the lawn. From across the street, I watched it all unfold, my fingers gripping the steering wheel. And slowly, an unexpected laugh bubbled up in my throat, a laugh so sharp and bright it startled me. Not because I was happy, but because I finally felt the weight lift, the burden of their expectations, their quiet manipulations, their subtle insults, all of it crumbling right there on my front lawn. I sat back in my seat and let out a long, shaky breath. They had stripped me of so much over the years. My voice, my pride, my place at the table. But they had underestimated me. They never imagined I could take it all back with a single decisive act. Across the street, my daughter stood there, her in-laws staring at her in confusion, her plans for a sparkling New Year's party now scattered across the frozen grass. I watched her finally look up at the house. Really look at it. And I knew in that instant she understood. She had pushed too far. She had gambled on my silence. And she lost. I turned the key in the ignition, the old engine rumbling to life. As I pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back. I drove home in silence. The roads were empty, everyone else busy preparing for midnight toasts and confetti. My hands stayed steady on the wheel, even as my heart thudded with something too tangled to name: grief, relief, pride, loss. When I got home, I slipped off my coat and set it carefully on the chair. My house felt different, not brighter, not exactly happier, but clearer, as if a heavy fog had finally lifted. I opened a bottle of wine I had been saving for a special occasion. Funny how those special occasions never included me when it came to my family. I poured a glass and took a slow sip. The bitterness spread across my tongue, sharp and almost medicinal. Then the phone started buzzing again. One message after another flooding in. "How could you do this to us? You're cruel, heartless. We just wanted to celebrate as a family." I read every word. My fingers hovered over the screen as if they might burn me. I waited for guilt to roar up and drag me back to my knees. It didn't come. Instead, I felt a small, fierce clarity. I set the phone face down on the table and picked up my wine glass again. I walked into the living room, switched on the soft lamp by the fireplace, and sat in my favorite armchair, the one nobody ever thought to ask about when they started redesigning my life. My daughter's voice still echoed in my head, shrill and panicked. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. But pity had no place here tonight. I looked around my quiet room, my small sanctuary, the handmade quilt draped over the couch, my husband's old record player in the corner, my knitting basket by my feet. On January 2nd, she came. I heard her before I saw her, heavy footsteps on the porch, the sharp slam of her car door. I opened the front door before she could knock. She stood there, face blotchy, eyes wild. No makeup today, no polite daughter act, just raw, desperate anger. She stepped forward, but I didn't move. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed, her voice cracking like glass. "You humiliated me. You embarrassed us in front of everyone. After everything I've done for you." I watched her, feeling the heat of her rage on my skin. For a moment, a memory flickered. Her as a little girl, running toward me with skinned knees, arms open, crying for comfort. But that image dissolved. She wasn't that child anymore. And I wasn't her soft landing anymore. I drew in a slow breath and looked her straight in the eyes. "You taught me how betrayal feels," I said, my voice low and even. "I only returned the lesson." She froze. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I took a small step forward, closing the space between us. "I gave you everything," I continued, my words slow and deliberate. "I gave and gave until I was nothing but a wallet with a pulse. You took my love, my home, my trust, and twisted it into something ugly and entitled." She let out a strangled sob. "I didn't mean—" "No," I cut her off. "You meant it. You wanted my house, my sacrifices, my silence, but you didn't want me. You only missed me when I stopped saying yes." Tears spilled down her face, her shoulders slumping like a puppet with cut strings. I felt my own tears threaten, but I held them back. There would be time for grief later, not now. "You told me you wanted just family," I said. "Now you know what it looks like when the mother you underestimated finally stands up." She stared at me, her lips trembling, hands shaking by her sides. For a moment, I thought she might say something, an apology, a plea, a final jab. But instead, she turned and stumbled down the steps, her sobs echoing off the quiet street. She fumbled with her car door, and then she was gone, tires screeching as she sped away. I stood on the porch a long while after, the cold air biting at my cheeks. I felt the tremor in my hands, the slow ache blooming behind my ribs, but under it all, a sharp, clear certainty. I had done what needed to be done. I stepped back inside and closed the door. My heart was heavy, yes, but it was my own again, and for the first time in a long, long time, I knew it beat for me.